I'm Tom Lovejoy. I've actually worked in the Amazon for 53 years, starting in 1965, which was a very different Amazon from the one we know today. So there's been a fair amount of environmental degradation. In one sense, it's simplistic. Degrading an environment basically pulls the rug out of under its capacity to support humans and other forms of life. But to really think about this challenge, you have to start by realizing that no organism can exist without affecting its environment. There is no choice of whether we affect the environment or not. The choice is much more complex. It's about how and in what ways, and what do the actual increments of impact on the environment add up to in the end. That's the complex background of all of this, but when you actually look at the impact of humanity on the environment across the planet, you see abundant evidence of major degradation almost everywhere you look. An enormous amount of degraded land in the world, degraded to the point where its productivity and support of living things and support of humanity has been severely compromised. And so parenthetically, there's a major opportunity in restoring those lands to greater productivity, to greater support for the variety of life on Earth. The story of degradation of land is probably as old as humanity. It probably started with our use of fire. And then when we managed to conceive of and start agriculture about 11,000 years ago, that worked wonderfully well up to a point. And then the usual things that we know about today of soil erosion and salinity in the soil, because that was mostly a dry area where agriculture started, began to really severely compromise the ability of that particular area to be productive. So in the end, adding up all the different ways in which we affect the land, and indeed not just the land, but the waters, the fresh waters, and even the oceans, are diminishing the capacity of the planet to support people in a sustainable way into the future. So we need to really actually be quite proactive in doing two things simultaneously: protecting the extraordinary biological wealth with which this planet is endowed, and any particular element of which can suddenly transform how we think about the life sciences and how it can be helpful to us. But at the same time, also think about ways in which we can much more gently manage the land and the living systems of the planet to support human aspiration. So my own view is that in the end, we need to think about embedding human aspiration in nature, in many senses sort of glory in the rich nature of this planet, and embrace it in a way that can allow it to support a happy future for very large numbers of people that we already have right now and which are going to grow. That's what the concern about degradation is. It's literally diminishing the capacity of the planet to support humans and other forms of life. And one way to think about it is to think about the island of Hispaniola in the Caribbean, which was Columbus's first landfall. So if you look in the logbooks of Columbus's first voyage, there is a phrase that approximately says, "The admiral said he had never seen so fair an isle, all filled with many different kinds of trees and many different kinds of birds in them singing sweetly." So that was sort of the biological paradise as first glimpsed in the New World by Columbus and his sailors. Today that island is two nations, the Dominican Republic on the eastern end and Haiti on the western end. And on the eastern end, there's still a lot of intact nature and a lot of intact forest, pretty healthy coral reefs. And on the western end, Haiti has been mostly stripped of the natural vegetation. There are very few trees that grow in most parts of Haiti. And a good colleague of mine Professor Agard from the University of the West Indies describes Haiti as the unthinkable experiment that no scientist would ever be allowed to conduct. What happens to a country when basically you remove the natural biodiversity with which it was originally endowed? So the consequences for the people who live in Haiti is really, a lot of misery. It's very hard for a tree to ever grow to full size because it's immediately cut down and used for firewood. If there is a definition of degraded land, it's the country of Haiti. And yet that was a country which not only originally was like Columbus described it, but also at the time of the American Revolution, its exports to France were greater in value than all 13 North American colonies' exports to Britain. I think that is a very stark example of degradation. So those are the kinds of endpoints that we need to deal with, both by avoiding further degradation, but also those are areas that we need to be actively engaged in restoring. Bringing back the capacity of the land to support many forms of life and humans at the same time. At this moment in the history of the interaction between people and the nature of this planet, we're at a major turning point. We can either continue in the very wasteful way that we've largely approached this over millennia, or we can sit back for a second and recognize that the better path forward is to avoid further degradation and engage in very serious restoration. So that is the story of degradation up to today, whether you're thinking about the Dust Bowl in the United States, which later was repaired by restoring the natural vegetation, or whether we're thinking about the Amazon and the importance of the forest in supporting the actual hydrological cycle and rainfall of the basin.